I never thought a snowstorm in Boulder, Colorado would turn into a declaration of war with my homeowners association. But here we were, standing in my driveway while Linda Henderson from the HOA board pointed at the 3 inches of snow still coating my pavement like I had personally insulted her family name. "Mr. Richardson, this is unacceptable," she said, her breath visible in the cold February air. "The storm ended 6 hours ago and your driveway is still covered." Section 12.4 of our community guidelines clearly states that all snow must be cleared within 8 hours of the storm's conclusion. I looked at my watch. It was 2 in the afternoon. The snow had stopped falling around 8 that morning. I had been planning to clear it around 4, giving myself plenty of time before the deadline. But something about Linda's tone, the way she stood there in her pristine white parka with her arms crossed, made something snap inside me. "Linda, I still have 2 hours," I said calmly. "The snow will be cleared before the deadline." "That's not the point, Vincent," she replied, using my first name like we were old friends instead of bitter acquaintances. "Other homeowners have already cleared their driveways. Your property makes the entire street look unkempt. We have standards here at Mountain View Estates." I had moved to this neighborhood 6 months ago, excited about the location and the mountain views. What I hadn't anticipated was that the HOA would be run by a woman who seemed to believe that her position on the board made her some sort of local dictator. Linda was in her mid-40s, always dressed like she was about to attend a country club luncheon, and had made it her personal mission to ensure that every single resident followed every single rule to the letter. "I understand the standards," I said, keeping my voice level, "and I will meet them within the designated time frame." Linda's face reddened slightly. "I don't appreciate your attitude, Mr. Richardson. Perhaps if you showed more initiative and cleared your snow promptly like your neighbors, we wouldn't need to have these conversations." That was it. That was the moment I decided that if Linda wanted to play games, I could play games too. I smiled politely and nodded. "You're absolutely right, Linda. I'll make sure to be more prompt in the future." She seemed satisfied with that response and walked back to her black Lexus, parked conveniently in front of my house so she could monitor my snow removal progress. I watched her drive away, then went inside and set a timer on my phone. At exactly 5 hours and 59 minutes after the storm ended, I walked outside with my snow shovel and began clearing my driveway at a pace that could only be described as glacial. I moved each shovelful of snow with deliberate slowness, taking breaks every few minutes to examine my work, adjust my gloves, or simply stand and admire the mountain view. My neighbor, Tom, came out to get his mail and gave me a confused look. "You feeling okay there, Vince?" he asked. "You're moving like you're 90 years old." "Just being thorough," I replied, slowly lifting another shovelful of snow and gently depositing it on the growing pile at the edge of my driveway. The truth was, I finished clearing the driveway with exactly 12 minutes to spare. Linda must have been watching because my phone rang 3 minutes after I went back inside. "Mr. Richardson, this is Linda Henderson. While you technically cleared your driveway within the 8-hour window, I must say that your delayed response time is concerning. Most residents clear their driveways much sooner." "The rules say 8 hours, Linda. I followed the rules." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Yes, well, perhaps we should consider amending that rule. I'll be bringing it up at the next board meeting." She hung up before I could respond. I sat down on my couch and laughed. This woman was actually going to change the HOA rules because I had followed them in a way she didn't like. I decided right then that if she wanted to make this a thing, I would make it a thing right back. 2 weeks later, Another snowstorm hit Boulder. This one was bigger, dropping nearly 8 inches overnight. The storm ended at 6 in the morning on a Saturday. I set my alarm, got up, made myself a leisurely breakfast, watched some television, and then, at approximately 1:45 in the afternoon, I went outside to begin clearing my snow. But this time, I had a plan. I had purchased the smallest snow shovel I could find at the local hardware store. It was actually a children's snow shovel, designed for kids to help their parents. The blade was maybe 8 inches wide. I also dressed in layers upon layers of clothing, making my movements even more restricted and slow. I began my snow removal process with all the urgency of a sloth on sedatives. Each tiny shovelful took approximately 30 seconds to collect, carry, and dump. My neighbors started coming out to watch. Tom brought his wife, Sarah, and they stood on their porch with coffee mugs, openly staring. "Vince, what are you doing?" Tom called out. "Do you need help? Are you injured?" "Just following the HOA guidelines," I called back. 8 hours to clear the snow. I'm well within my rights. About an hour into my performance, Linda's Lexus pulled up. She got out of the car, her face already showing signs of the anger I had anticipated. "Mr. Richardson, what on earth are you doing with that toy shovel, clearing my driveway, Linda? As per Section 12.4 of the Community Guidelines. That is a child's shovel. This is going to take you hours." "Well, lucky for me, I have 8 hours from when the storm ended. That gives me until 2 this afternoon. I'm making excellent progress." Her face went from pink to red to almost purple. "This is ridiculous. You're doing this on purpose. This is clearly a violation of the spirit of the rules." I stopped my slow shoveling and looked directly at her. "Linda, I am following the exact letter of the rules. If you have a problem with how I'm following them, perhaps the rules need to be more specific. But as they stand right now, I am in complete compliance." She stood there sputtering for a moment before pulling out her phone and taking pictures of me with my tiny shovel. "We'll see about this at the board meeting," she snapped before getting back in her car and driving away. I continued my extremely slow snow removal process. Several neighbors came by to ask if I was okay, if I needed help, or if I was having some sort of medical emergency that prevented me from moving at a normal speed. I politely declined all assistance and explained that I was simply following the HOA rules to the letter. I finished clearing my driveway at 1:58 in the afternoon, 2 minutes before my 8-hour window closed. I went inside, made myself some hot chocolate, and waited for the inevitable phone call. It came at 2:15. "Mr. Richardson, this is Linda Henderson. Your behavior today was absolutely unacceptable. I will be filing a formal complaint with the HOA board." "On what grounds?" I asked innocently. "I cleared my snow within the designated time frame. You were deliberately being difficult. You used an inappropriate tool and worked at an unnecessarily slow pace." "Linda, nowhere in Section 12.4 does it specify what type of shovel I must use or how quickly I must work. It only states that the snow must be cleared within 8 hours. I complied fully with the rule as written." "This is harassment, Mr. Richardson." I actually laughed at that. "Harassment? I'm clearing snow from my own driveway. How is that harassment? You're doing it to spite me and the HOA board." "I'm doing it to comply with your rules, Linda. If you don't like how I'm complying, maybe the rules need to be more specific, or maybe they need to be more reasonable." She hung up on me again. I sat back and smiled. This was actually starting to be fun. The next HOA board meeting was scheduled for the following Thursday evening. I received a formal notice in my mailbox 3 days before the meeting, stating that my snow removal practices would be discussed and that my attendance was strongly encouraged. I cleared my evening schedule and showed up at the community center at 7 sharp. The meeting was held in a bland conference room with fluorescent lighting and uncomfortable plastic chairs. About 15 residents were in attendance, which was apparently a high turnout for these things. Linda sat at the front table with 3 other board members. Gary Stevenson, a retired accountant who seemed perpetually bored, Patricia Wilson, a younger woman in her 30s who always looked like she'd rather be anywhere else, and Robert Chen, an older gentleman who actually seemed reasonable and fair-minded. Linda called the meeting to order and went through the usual business financial reports, upcoming community events, complaints about dog waste. Then she got to the main event. Item 7 on our agenda concerns Mr. Vincent Richardson and his inappropriate snow removal practices, Linda announced, looking directly at me. Over the past month, Mr. Richardson has been clearing his driveway in a manner that we believe violates the spirit of our community guidelines. I raised my hand. May I speak? Robert nodded. Of course, Mr. Richardson. This concerns you, so you should have a chance to defend yourself. Thank you, Robert. I'd like to point out that I have not violated any rules. I have cleared my driveway within the 8-hour window specified in Section 12.4 every single time it has snowed since I moved here. I have photographic evidence with time stamps if needed. Linda cut in. You've been using a child's shovel and working at an absurdly slow pace. This is clearly an attempt to mock the HOA. Linda, I've been using the tools available to me and working at a pace I'm comfortable with. Nowhere in the rules does it specify the size of shovel I must use or the speed at which I must work. I'm a homeowner who paid a significant amount of money to live in this community, and I'm following your rules exactly as they are written. Gary, the board accountant, actually perked up at this. He's got a point, Linda. The rules don't specify methodology, just the time frame. Linda shot him a look that could have frozen the remaining snow in my driveway. The rules assume that people will act in good faith and with common sense. And I am, I replied. I'm clearing my snow within the designated time period. If you want to specify that I need to use a shovel of a certain size or work at a certain speed, then you need to put that in the rules. Otherwise, I'm going to continue doing exactly what I've been doing. Patricia, the younger board member, spoke up for the first time. I actually agree with Mr. Richardson. If the rules don't specify these things, we can't punish him for following them in his own way. Maybe we need to look at revising the rules if they're not clear enough. Linda was not happy with this turn of events. Fine. I propose we amend Section 12.4 to specify that snow removal must be completed within 4 hours of a storm's conclusion and must be done using appropriate adult-sized snow removal equipment. 4 hours, I said, standing up. That's completely unreasonable. What if it snows overnight and I'm asleep? What if I'm at work? 8 hours is already pretty strict. Cutting that in half is just vindictive. Several other homeowners murmured in agreement. Tom, my neighbor, spoke up from the back of the room. I have to agree with Vince here. 4 hours is tough to meet with a work schedule. 8 hours seems fair. Robert nodded thoughtfully. I think Tom and Vincent make good points. The 8-hour window was chosen specifically to accommodate people's schedules. Reducing it to 4 hours could create real hardship for working families. Linda's face was getting red again. Then what about the shovel requirement? Can we at least specify that appropriate equipment must be used? Define appropriate, I said. What if I want to use a snow blower? What if I want to use a push shovel versus a regular shovel? What if I hire a service that uses a plow? These things need to be clearly defined if you're going to make them rules. The meeting devolved into a debate about snow removal equipment specifications that lasted nearly 45 minutes. In the end, the board voted 3-1 with only Linda voting yes to keep the rules exactly as they were. She was furious, but she was outvoted. As everyone filed out of the meeting, Robert pulled me aside. "Vincent, I appreciate that you're technically following the rules, but I get the sense that you're doing this to make a point rather than out of any real necessity." I considered lying, but Robert seemed like a decent guy who deserved honesty. "You're right, Robert. Linda has been on my case since I moved in about every tiny thing. The snow removal thing was just the last straw. I'm proving a point that if you're going to have rules, they need to be reasonable and clearly written. You can't just harass people for following them in a way you don't personally prefer." Robert smiled slightly. "I understand the frustration. Between you and me, Linda can be a bit overzealous, but maybe there's a better way to handle this than what amounts to malicious compliance." "I'm open to suggestions," I said. "But so far, every time I try to just live my life and follow the rules normally, Linda finds something to complain about. At least this way, I'm following the rules so exactly that she can't actually cite me for anything." Robert nodded. "Fair enough. Just be careful. Linda doesn't like to lose, and she has a tendency to escalate situations." That warning proved prophetic. The following week, I received a certified letter from the HOA stating that I was being fined $250 for creating a public nuisance with my snow removal practices. The letter cited several complaints from neighbors about my slow snow removal causing concern and attracting unwanted attention to the neighborhood. I was furious. I called Robert immediately. "Did you know about this fine?" "I just found out," he said, sounding tired. "Linda pushed it through using an emergency provision that allows the HOA president to issue fines without a full board vote in cases of public nuisance. I'm sorry, Vincent. I'm going to contest it at the next meeting, but in the meantime, the fine stands. This is absolutely ridiculous. I followed the rules exactly. I know, and I'm on your side, but Linda has a lot of authority as president and she's using it." I hung up and immediately started researching Colorado HOA laws. I spent the next 3 days reading through statutes, court cases, and legal precedents. What I found was interesting. While HOAs in Colorado had significant authority, they were also subject to some pretty strict regulations about how they could enforce rules and issue fines. Specifically, homeowners had the right to a hearing before any fine was issued, and fines for public nuisance required documented complaints from multiple residents. I drafted a formal letter to the HOA board requesting a hearing to contest the fine and demanding to see the documented complaints that had led to it being issued. I sent it certified mail and copied all 4 board members individually. The hearing was scheduled for 2 weeks later. In the meantime, another snowstorm hit, and I decided to up my game. I cleared my snow within the 8-hour window, but this time I did it in the most technically compliant yet absurd way possible. I used a dustpan and brush for the first hour, then switched to the children's shovel, then finished with a regular shovel. The entire process took exactly 7 hours and 58 minutes. Linda must have been watching from somewhere because she was parked in front of my house when I finished. She got out of her car, holding her phone up to record me. "This is proof of harassment," she said loudly, clearly speaking for the benefit of her recording. "Mr. Richardson is deliberately disrupting the peace and dignity of our community with his absurd snow removal practices." I looked directly at her camera and smiled. "I am following Section 12.4 of the Mountain View Estates HOA guidelines exactly as written. I have cleared all snow from my driveway within 8 hours of the storm's conclusion. I am in full compliance with all HOA rules and regulations." You're using this as some kind of protest against the HOA. You're causing a disturbance. I'm clearing snow from my driveway, Linda. That's literally what you wanted me to do. If you don't like how I'm doing it, change the rules. Oh, wait, you tried to do that and the board voted you down. So maybe the problem isn't me. Maybe the problem is that you want to control every aspect of everyone's lives, and you're upset that someone is actually standing up to you. Her face went purple again, and for a moment, I thought she might actually explode. Instead, she got back in her car and peeled out, leaving tire marks on the snow-covered street. Tom came over after she left. "Dude, you're really poking the bear here. Linda's not going to let this go." "Good," I said, "because neither am I." This started with her harassing me about clearing my snow too slowly when I was still well within the time limit. Now she's fining me for following the rules. Someone needs to stand up to her. "I get it," Tom said. "And honestly, a lot of us are glad someone finally is. Linda's been making life difficult around here for years. But be careful. She's got friends on the city council and she knows people. She could make things really difficult for you." The hearing finally arrived. I showed up with a folder full of documentation. Printed copies of the HOA rules, timestamps and photos of every snow removal I'd done, and a printed copy of Colorado HOA statutes. The same board members were present, along with about 20 residents this time. Word had apparently spread that there was drama. Linda opened the proceedings. "We're here to discuss the $250 fine issued to Mr. Vincent Richardson for creating a public nuisance with his snow removal practices. Mr. Richardson has requested this hearing to contest the fine." "That's correct," I said, standing up. "I'd like to start by requesting to see the documented complaints that led to this fine being issued." According to Colorado Revised Statutes Section 38, 33.3, 03.1, an HOA must provide written documentation of complaints when issuing fines for nuisance violations. Linda looked uncomfortable. "We received several verbal complaints from concerned residents." "Verbal complaints aren't sufficient under Colorado law," I replied. "I need to see written, documented complaints with dates and signatures." Additionally, I was not provided a hearing before the fine was issued, which violates Section 38, 33.3, 03.4, which requires that homeowners be given an opportunity to be heard before fines are assessed. Gary, the accountant, leaned forward. "He's right, Linda. I looked into this after Vincent requested the hearing. We should have documented the complaints in writing and held a hearing before issuing the fine." Linda's jaw clenched. "Fine. We're holding the hearing now." I personally have observed Mr. Richardson engaging in deliberately slow snow removal using inappropriate equipment. This behavior has attracted attention from neighbors and passers-by, creating a spectacle that lowers the dignity of our community. "Your personal observations aren't the same as documented complaints from multiple residents," I said. "And I'd like to point out that I have followed every single rule in the HOA guidelines. Not once have I been late clearing my snow. Not once have I violated any written rule. The only thing I've done is follow those rules in a manner that you personally don't like. That's not a violation, Linda. That's you having a personal vendetta." Several residents started murmuring. Patricia, the younger board member, spoke up. "I have to agree with Vincent. If he's following the rules, even if it's in an unconventional way, we can't fine him for that. We can only enforce the rules we have, not the rules we wish we had." "This is absurd," Linda said, her voice rising. "He's clearly mocking the HOA. He's using a child's shovel and taking all day to clear a simple driveway. He's doing it to spite us." "So what if I am?" I said, my own voice rising to match hers. You've been harassing me since the day I moved in. Every week it's something new. My grass is a quarter-inch too long. My holiday lights are the wrong color temperature. My car is parked 6 inches too far from the curb. I'm tired of it, Linda. I'm tired of your constant surveillance and criticism. So yes, I'm following your rules in the most annoying way possible because I'm making a point. You want to control everything, but you can't control how I choose to comply with rules that I'm complying with. The room went silent. Linda stood up, her hands shaking. That's it. I'm recommending we move to revoke your residency and force a sale of your property. You're a disruptive influence on this community. Now Robert stood up. Linda, sit down. We can't do that. Colorado HOA law is very clear about the grounds for forced sale, and annoying the HOA president isn't one of them. Vincent is right. He's following the rules. If you don't like how he's following them, we need to change the rules through proper channels with a full board vote. We can't just make up punishments because we don't like someone. Linda looked around the table at the other board members, clearly expecting support. Gary was studiously examining his papers. Patricia was shaking her head. Only Robert met her eyes, and his expression was stern. Fine, Linda said. I'm calling for a vote. All in favor of upholding the $250 fine. Linda's hand went up. Nobody else moved, all opposed. 3 hands went up. Robert, Gary, and Patricia all voted against the fine. The motion fails, Robert said. The fine is rescinded. Vincent, you don't owe anything. Linda, I think we need to have a discussion about how we handle enforcement going forward. Linda grabbed her purse and stormed out of the room without another word. The meeting continued for a few more minutes, but it was clear that everyone was too shocked by what had just happened to focus on anything else. We adjourned early. As I was leaving, several residents came up to thank me. Apparently, Linda had been making life difficult for a lot of people, but nobody had wanted to stand up to her because she had a reputation for retaliation. Tom clapped me on the shoulder. You did it, man. You actually beat her. I don't think this is over, I said, watching through the window as Linda sat in her car, talking angrily on her phone. She looked way too angry to just let this go. I was right. Over the next week, I started noticing strange things. My trash cans would be knocked over after collection. Someone left a passive-aggressive note on my door about my porch light being too bright, even though it was the same light that had been there when I bought the house. My mailbox was vandalized with spray paint. I installed security cameras. 2 days later, I caught Linda on camera at 2 in the morning, walking up my driveway and leaving another note. This one accused me of having a weed problem in my lawn and demanded immediate treatment. It was February. There was snow on the ground. There were no weeds. I saved the footage and filed a police report for harassment. The officer who took my statement looked at the video and shook his head. HOA dispute, he asked. How'd you guess? We get these calls more often than you'd think. Unfortunately, leaving a note isn't really a crime. If she keeps it up or escalates, let us know and we can potentially file for a restraining order. But for now, this is more of a civil matter. Great. So Linda could harass me all she wanted, and the police couldn't do anything unless she really crossed a line. I decided to take a different approach. I called Robert. I've got Linda on camera trespassing on my property and leaving harassing notes, I told him. I know this has become personal between us, but this is getting out of hand. Is there anything the board can do? Robert sighed. I've been getting similar complaints from other residents. Linda's always been intense, but she's gotten worse lately. The problem is, as HOA president, she has a lot of authority, and removing her requires a vote from the homeowners, not just the board. That means we'd need to call a special meeting and get a majority of residents to vote for her removal. How many residents are we talking about? There are 84 homes in Mountain View Estates. We'd need at least 43 votes to remove her. What if I organized it? Would you support it? Absolutely. So would Patricia and probably Gary. But Vincent, you need to understand that Linda has lived here for 15 years. She has friends and allies in this community. Getting enough votes to remove her won't be easy. It's worth a try, I said. Because if she's doing this to me, she's probably doing it to others. And someone needs to stop her. I spent the next 2 weeks going door to door, talking to every resident I could find. What I discovered was shocking. Nearly half the neighborhood had stories about Linda harassing them, issuing unreasonable fines, or making their lives difficult over minor infractions. A retired couple on Maple Street told me Linda had fined them $500 because their bird bath was 6 inches too close to the sidewalk. A single mother on Oak Drive said Linda had reported her to the city for a code violation that didn't exist, resulting in a stressful inspection that found nothing wrong. The more people I talked to, the more I realized that my situation wasn't unique. Linda had been abusing her position for years, and everyone had just been too afraid or too tired to fight back. Now that someone was finally standing up to her, they were ready to join the fight. I gathered signatures on a petition calling for a special homeowner meeting to vote on Linda's removal as HOA president. Within a week, I had 60 signatures. The rules required only 25% of homeowners to call for a special meeting, so we were well over the threshold. I submitted the petition to the HOA board. Robert immediately scheduled the meeting for 3 weeks out, which was the minimum notice period required under the bylaws. Linda, predictably, lost her mind. She started her own campaign, going door to door to defend herself and paint me as a troublemaker who was trying to destroy the community. She sent out mass emails to all residents, claiming that I was leading a rebellion against reasonable rules, and that removing her would lead to chaos and declining property values. But her tactics backfired. The more she campaigned, the more people remembered all the times she'd harassed them or their neighbors. The more she sent out angry emails, the more people got tired of her drama. By the time the special meeting rolled around, the mood in the neighborhood had shifted decisively against her. The meeting was held in the community center, and this time nearly 70 residents showed up. The room was packed, with people standing along the walls because there weren't enough chairs. Robert called the meeting to order and explained the process. We're here tonight because a petition signed by 60 homeowners has called for a vote on removing Linda Henderson as HOA president. Linda will have 15 minutes to speak in her defense. Then Vincent Richardson, who organized the petition, will have 15 minutes to present the case for removal. After that, we'll open the floor for comments, and then we'll vote. Linda stood up, and I had to admit she looked more put together than I'd ever seen her. She'd clearly prepared for this. I've served this community faithfully for 8 years as your HOA president, she began. I've worked tirelessly to maintain property values, enforce rules, and keep Mountain View Estates a beautiful, desirable place to live. I won't stand here and say I've never made an unpopular decision. Leadership requires making tough calls sometimes. But everything I've done has been for the good of this community. She went on for her full 15 minutes, talking about her accomplishments and painting herself as a victim of a personal vendetta from a disgruntled resident who couldn't handle being held accountable for following the rules. It was a good speech, I had to admit. If I didn't know the truth, I might have been swayed. Then it was my turn. I stood up and pulled out my folder of documentation. I'm not going to talk about myself or my dispute with Linda, I said. Instead, I'm going to talk about the dozens of residents who shared their stories with me over the past few weeks. The retired couple who were fined $500 for a bird bath placement. The single mother who was reported for a code violation that didn't exist. The family who was cited for parking violations when their car was legally parked. The couple who were fined for having the wrong shade of brown paint on their fence. These aren't isolated incidents. This is a pattern of abuse. I spent my 15 minutes detailing story after story, naming names with permission from the residents involved. By the time I finished, Linda's face was bright red, and several people in the audience were nodding along. The comment period was even more damaging for Linda. One by one, residents stood up to share their own experiences with her authoritarian approach to the HOA. Even some of her friends seemed uncomfortable with the stories being shared. Finally, it was time to vote. Robert explained that the vote would be by secret ballot to prevent any retaliation. Everyone filled out their slips of paper and dropped them in a box. Gary and Patricia counted them together while everyone waited in tense silence. Finally, Gary stood up. The votes have been counted and verified. Out of 68 votes cast, 49 voted in favor of removing Linda Henderson as HOA president. 19 voted against. The motion passes. The room erupted in applause. Linda stood up, her face a mask of shock and rage. She looked around at all the clapping residents, then her eyes locked on me. "This is your fault," she hissed. "You've destroyed everything I built here." "You destroyed it yourself, Linda," I replied quietly. "All I did was give people the courage to say enough is enough." She grabbed her purse and stormed out for what I hoped would be the last time. Robert banged his gavel to restore order. With Linda's removal, the board needs to elect a new president. Per our bylaws, this requires a vote of the current board members. I nominate Patricia Wilson. Gary seconded the nomination, and Patricia was elected unanimously. She stood up, looking slightly overwhelmed but determined. "Thank you for your confidence," she said. "My first priority as president will be to review all of our rules and make sure they are fair and reasonable. I'll also be implementing a new policy where no fines can be issued without a full board review. And I promise to listen to all residents, not just enforce rules for the sake of enforcement." More applause. The meeting wrapped up shortly after, and I headed home feeling genuinely good about what had happened. It wasn't just about beating Linda in our personal feud. It was about making the neighborhood a better place for everyone. But as I pulled into my driveway, I noticed Linda's car parked on the street. She was sitting inside, just watching my house. I felt a chill run down my spine. Robert's warning about Linda not liking to lose came back to me. I pulled out my phone and made sure my security cameras were recording, then went inside and locked the doors. Nothing happened that night, but over the next few days, things started to escalate. My cameras caught Linda driving by my house multiple times a day. She would slow down, sometimes stop, and just sit there staring at my property. I documented everything and filed another police report. This time, the officer was more concerned. "This is starting to look like stalking," he said. "If she makes any direct threats or attempts to contact you, let us know immediately. In the meantime, I'll have a patrol car swing by your street more often." The next snowstorm arrived a week later. I decided to clear my snow normally this time, using a regular shovel at a reasonable pace. The whole stupid feud with Linda had started over snow removal, and now that she was no longer HOA president, there was no point in continuing the malicious compliance. I just wanted to live my life in peace. I finished clearing my driveway in about 45 minutes. As I was putting my shovel away in the garage, Linda's car pulled up. She got out and I immediately noticed something was wrong. Her hair was messy, Her clothes looked slept in, and her eyes had a wild quality that made me genuinely nervous. "You," she said, pointing at me. "You ruined everything. Do you understand what you've done? Linda, you need to leave," I said firmly. "You're not HOA president anymore. You have no reason to be here." "I gave 8 years to this community," she said, her voice rising. 8 years of my life making sure everything was perfect. And you destroyed it in a month. A month. Because you couldn't be bothered to shovel your snow like a normal person. Linda, I'm serious. Leave now, or I'm calling the police." She started walking toward me. I backed into my garage, my hand reaching for my phone. Before I could dial, Tom appeared from his yard. "Hey, Linda," he called out loudly. "I think you should go. Vince asked you to leave. You're trespassing." Linda spun around to face him. "This is none of your business, Tom." "Actually, it is. We're neighbors and we look out for each other. Especially when someone's being harassed. Go home, Linda." Sarah appeared next to Tom, also watching the confrontation. Then another neighbor and another. Within minutes, 5 people were standing in various yards, all watching Linda. She looked around at all of them, and something in her seemed to break. Her shoulders slumped and she started crying. "I just wanted everything to be nice," she sobbed. "I just wanted our neighborhood to be perfect." "Nobody wants perfect, Linda," Tom said, his voice gentler now. "We just want to live our lives without someone constantly criticizing us. Go home, get some help, but leave Vince alone." Linda wiped her eyes, got back in her car, and drove away. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. "Thanks, Tom," I said, "and everyone else." That was getting scary. "No problem," Tom replied, "but I think you should still call the police and report this. Her showing up at your house after being removed from the HOA, that's not normal behavior." I agreed and filed yet another report. This time, the officer said they'd try to contact Linda and issue a formal warning about harassment. I hoped that would be the end of it. 2 days later, I came home from work to find my front yard destroyed. Someone had dug up my flower beds, spray-painted obscenities on my driveway, and broken one of my front windows. My security cameras had been spray-painted over, but they had audio, and I could hear Linda's voice on the recording, muttering about how I deserved this for destroying her life. That was it. That was finally enough for the police to act. They went to Linda's house to arrest her for vandalism and destruction of property. What they found there shocked everyone. Linda had turned her house into what the police later described as a shrine to the HOA. Every wall was covered with maps of the neighborhood, photos of residents' homes with notes about rule violations, and detailed logs of everyone's activities. She had been documenting every single person in the neighborhood for years, tracking their movements, their visitors, their habits. It was obsessive and deeply disturbing. The police also found evidence that Linda had been responsible for a lot of the violations she had reported. The graffiti on several neighborhood fences, the late-night trash spills, the anonymous complaints to the city about various residents, all of it had been her, creating problems so she could swoop in and solve them by enforcing HOA rules. Linda was arrested and charged with criminal mischief, stalking, harassment, and vandalism. Her bail was set at $20,000, which she posted, but she was ordered to stay away from Mountain View Estates and all residents as a condition of her release. The trial happened 4 months later. I testified about the harassment, the vandalism, and the escalating behavior. So did several other residents. The prosecution presented the evidence from Linda's house, including her obsessive documentation of everyone in the neighborhood. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all counts. Linda was sentenced to 18 months in prison, 3 years of probation, and ordered to pay restitution for all the property damage she'd caused, not just to me but to several other residents over the years. She was also permanently banned from serving on any HOA board in Colorado. At the sentencing hearing, the judge had some harsh words. "Miss Henderson, you took a position of trust within your community and abused it spectacularly. Rather than serving your neighbors, you terrorized them. Rather than maintaining standards, you created an atmosphere of fear and surveillance. Your obsessive behavior and eventual criminal actions have caused real harm to real people. This court hopes that your time in prison will give you an opportunity to reflect on your actions and seek the help you clearly need." After everything was over, the neighborhood slowly returned to normal. Patricia proved to be an excellent HOA president, focused on reasonable enforcement and community building rather than rigid rule following. The board revised many of the more restrictive rules, including changing the snow removal requirement to 12 hours instead of 8, giving people more flexibility. As for me, I repaired my damaged property and settled into normal life in Mountain View Estates. Tom and I became good friends, and the neighborhood as a whole felt more relaxed and welcoming than it had when I first moved in. Occasionally, someone would jokingly ask me to clear their snow with my tiny shovel, and we'd all laugh about the absurdity of how the whole thing started. The following winter, when the first big snowstorm hit, I cleared my driveway with a regular shovel at a normal pace. As I finished, Tom came over with 2 beers. "You know," he said, handing me one, "I kind of miss the entertainment of you spending 8 hours clearing snow with that tiny shovel." I laughed. Trust me, it was entertaining for me too, but I'm glad those days are over. Although I did keep the tiny shovel, it's hanging in my garage as a reminder. A reminder of what? That sometimes you have to fight back against unreasonable authority, even if the method seems absurd. And that communities work better when people focus on being good neighbors instead of following rules for the sake of rules. Tom clinked his beer against mine. I'll drink to that. Looking back on the whole experience, the snow removal saga seems almost ridiculous. The idea that refusing to shovel my driveway quickly enough would lead to an HOA president being arrested and sent to prison sounds like something out of a dark comedy. But it happened, and it taught me some valuable lessons about standing up for myself and the importance of reasonable governance. The neighborhood thrived after Linda's removal. Property values actually went up, contrary to her predictions, because people wanted to live in a community that wasn't ruled by an iron fist. New families moved in, attracted by the newly relaxed atmosphere. The HOA became what it was supposed to be, a group of neighbors working together to maintain common areas and handle shared concerns, not an authoritarian regime dictating every aspect of daily life. I stayed in touch with the Boulder County courts to monitor Linda's situation. She served her full sentence without early release. The psychological evaluation ordered by the court revealed that she had significant control issues and obsessive-compulsive tendencies that had been focused on the HOA. She was required to undergo therapy as part of her probation. About 2 years after the trial, I received an unexpected letter. It was from Linda, postmarked from an address in Wyoming. She had apparently moved out of state after her release, unable to face living in Colorado anymore. The letter was surprisingly self-aware. She apologized for her behavior, acknowledged that she had let her need for control spiral into something toxic and criminal, and expressed genuine remorse for the harm she'd caused. She explained that therapy had helped her understand that she'd been using the HOA as a way to feel important and powerful in a life where she otherwise felt overlooked and undervalued. It didn't excuse what she'd done, but it at least provided some context. I showed the letter to Tom, who had also received one. We discussed whether to respond and ultimately decided against it. Linda needed to move forward with her life, and staying connected to the neighborhood she'd terrorized probably wasn't healthy for anyone involved. The tiny shovel remained hanging in my garage, a conversation piece whenever friends came over. I'd tell the story of the HOA war, usually getting laughs at the mental image of me spending 8 hours clearing a driveway with a child's shovel purely out of spite. But beneath the humor was a real point about the importance of reasonable rules and fair enforcement. Patricia served as HOA president for 3 years before stepping down to focus on her growing family. She was replaced by Robert, who continued the policies of reasonable governance and community focus. Under their leadership, the board implemented several reforms that made the HOA more democratic and responsive to residents. They created a formal complaint process that required documentation and due process before fines could be issued. They established regular town halls where residents could voice concerns and suggestions. They reduced the number of rules from 47 pages to 12, focusing only on genuine community needs like maintaining common areas and preventing actual nuisances. Most importantly, they implemented term limits for board positions, ensuring that no one person could accumulate too much power for too long. It was a direct response to what had happened with Linda, a structural solution to prevent future abuse. The changes worked. Mountain View Estates became one of the most desirable neighborhoods in Boulder, known for its strong sense of community and reasonable governance. Real estate agents would specifically mention the reformed HOA as a selling point. Articles about the transformation appeared in local news outlets, with urban planning experts citing it as an example of how HOAs should function. As for my relationship with snow removal, I maintained a healthy, normal approach. When it snowed, I cleared my driveway within a reasonable time frame using appropriate equipment. No more malicious compliance, no more tiny shovels, no more 8-hour marathons, just regular homeowner maintenance. But I'd be lying if I said I didn't occasionally look at that tiny shovel hanging in my garage and smile. It represented one of the strangest periods of my life, but also one of the most significant. It was a reminder that sometimes the smallest acts of defiance can spark major change. That standing up to bullies and abusers is worth doing, even when it seems easier to just go along. That communities are stronger when everyone has a voice, not just those in positions of authority. Tom and Sarah became close friends, and we spent many evenings on their back deck, drinking beer and watching the sunset over the mountains. We joke about the old days, when leaving your trash cans out 15 minutes too long could result in a fine, or when having the wrong shade of outdoor light bulb was considered a serious offense. Their kids loved the story of the tiny shovel and would sometimes ask me to tell it again. I'd always oblige, adding dramatic flourishes about Linda's increasingly purple face each time she discovered me clearing snow at a glacial pace. The kids thought it was hilarious, but Sarah would always use it as a teaching moment about standing up for what's right and not letting bullies push you around. Years passed. Mountain View Estates continued to thrive as a community. I advanced in my career, made lasting friendships, and genuinely enjoyed living in the neighborhood. The dramatic days of the HOA conflict faded into memory, becoming just another interesting story in my life. But the lessons stuck with me. I became more active in local politics, attending city council meetings and advocating for fair governance at all levels. I joined the board of directors for a local nonprofit that helped homeowners understand their rights when dealing with HOAs. I wanted to make sure others didn't have to go through what I'd experienced, or if they did, that they'd know they had options and support. The nonprofit work was eye-opening. I heard stories from across Colorado about HOA abuses that made my situation look tame. Foreclosures over unpaid fines for trivial violations, discriminatory enforcement of rules, board members embezzling HOA funds. The problems were systemic and widespread, but I also heard success stories. Communities that had reformed their governance structures, residents who had successfully challenged unfair rules, neighborhoods that had found the right balance between maintaining standards and respecting individual freedom. Those stories gave me hope and motivation to keep working for change. One day, about 5 years after the whole snow removal incident began, I got a call from a reporter at the Denver Post. They were doing a feature story on HOA reform in Colorado and had heard about what happened in Mountain View Estates. Would I be willing to be interviewed? I agreed, and the resulting article became the newspaper's most read online story that month. It told the full saga of the Tiny Shovel Rebellion, Linda's arrest and conviction, and the successful reforms that followed. But more than that, it sparked a broader conversation about HOA governance throughout the state. State legislators took notice. Within a year, Colorado passed new laws strengthening homeowner rights in HOA disputes, requiring more transparency in HOA operations, and creating clearer paths for residents to challenge unfair rules and fines. The legislation was informally nicknamed the Linda Henderson Act by some local activists, though that name never made it into the official text. I was invited to testify before the state legislature when the bills were being debated. Standing in the Capitol building in Denver, telling my story to lawmakers, felt surreal. What had started as a petty dispute about snow removal had become part of a statewide movement for reform. Not everyone was happy about the changes, of course. Some HOA board members and property management companies argued that the new laws would make it harder to maintain community standards. But the overwhelming support from homeowners across the state made it clear that reform was necessary and wanted. Mountain View Estates became a model for what reformed HOA governance could look like. Patricia and Robert were invited to speak at community planning conferences and HOA board training sessions. They shared the lessons learned from the Linda Henderson era and the positive changes that had followed. The tiny shovel took on a life of its own. Someone in the neighborhood suggested we mount it in the community center as a memorial to the incident. The idea was approved, and now it hangs on the wall near the meeting room where Linda was voted out, with a small plaque explaining its significance. Visitors to the community center often stop to read the story and take pictures. Tom joked that we should sell tiny shovels as Mountain View Estates merchandise. While that never happened, the image did become an unofficial symbol of the neighborhood's transformation. Some residents even put tiny shovel stickers on their cars or mailboxes as a badge of pride. As years continued to pass, new residents moved in who didn't remember the Linda Henderson era firsthand. But the story became part of the neighborhood's oral history, passed down from longtime residents to newcomers. It served as both a cautionary tale and a source of community pride, a reminder of how bad things had gotten and how far they'd come. I eventually sold my house in Mountain View Estates when I got married and my wife, and I decided to move to a larger property outside of Boulder. Leaving was bittersweet. The neighborhood had been the site of one of the most stressful but ultimately rewarding experiences of my life. I'd made lifelong friends there and been part of genuine positive change. The buyers who purchased my house were a young couple with 2 kids. During the walkthrough, they noticed the empty spot in the garage where the tiny shovel used to hang. "Is that where the famous shovel was?" the husband asked excitedly. "We read about this neighborhood online. The HOA reform story was actually one of the reasons we wanted to move here." I smiled. "That's the spot. The shovel itself is now in the community center, but its spirit lives on." The wife laughed. "Our last neighborhood had an HOA president who sounds a lot like this Linda person. Not quite as bad, but same controlling attitude. It's nice to know we're moving somewhere that actually learned from that kind of experience." Before I moved out, the neighborhood threw me a going-away party at the community center. Nearly 100 people showed up. Tom gave a speech about how I'd accidentally become a hero by being stubborn about snow removal. Patricia presented me with a framed photo of the tiny shovel with signatures from residents thanking me for standing up to Linda. Robert gave me a copy of the updated HOA bylaws, inscribed with a note about how they wouldn't exist without someone being willing to fight for change. It was overwhelming and touching, and made me realize how much the whole experience had meant to people beyond just me. It wasn't really about snow removal at all. It was about dignity, respect, and the right to live in your own home without constant harassment from petty tyrants. My wife, Victoria Harper, found the whole story amusing. She'd heard various versions of it while we were dating, but attending the going-away party and seeing how much it meant to the community gave her a new appreciation for what had happened. "I can't believe all of this started because you were too slow shoveling snow," she said on the drive to our new house. "Well, technically it started because Linda was obsessed with control and I refused to be controlled," I replied. "The snow was just the trigger." Still, of all the ways to spark a revolution deliberately using a tiny shovel to annoy someone into getting arrested, that's definitely going in our family history. She was right. It became one of those stories we'd tell at parties or family gatherings. People always reacted with disbelief at first, then laughter, then usually a thoughtful discussion about their own experiences with HOAs or other authoritarian situations in their lives. Years later, I heard through Tom that Linda had eventually moved back to Colorado, settling in a rural area outside of Colorado Springs. She apparently lived alone, volunteered at a local animal shelter, and stayed far away from any HOA involvement. Her criminal record and the publicity from the trial had effectively ended any possibility of her holding that kind of position again, which was probably for the best. I bore her no ill will at that point. Time and perspective had made me see her less as a villain and more as someone who had serious personal issues that she'd channeled in a destructive way. She'd paid for her crimes through prison time, probation, and the complete destruction of her reputation. I hoped she'd found some peace. The legacy of the tiny shovel rebellion lived on, though. The reforms in Mountain View estates inspired similar changes in other Colorado HOAs. The state laws passed in response to the incident provided protections for homeowners across Colorado. And the story itself became a touchstone in discussions about governance, power, and the importance of standing up to abuse. I kept in touch with Tom and several other friends from the neighborhood. We'd get together a few times a year, and inevitably the conversation would turn to memories of the Linda Henderson era. Each time, new details would emerge, someone remembering another absurd rule she tried to enforce, or another instance of her surveillance and harassment that hadn't come out during the trial. But we'd also talk about how much better the neighborhood had become after she left. The sense of community was stronger. People actually enjoyed living there instead of feeling like they were walking on eggshells all the time. The HOA functioned as it should, handling necessary business without interfering in residents' daily lives. On the 10th anniversary of Linda's removal as HOA president, Mountain View Estates held a community celebration. It was framed as a general neighborhood party, but everyone knew what was really being celebrated. Tom made sure to give a toast specifically mentioning the tiny shovel heard round the HOA. I attended with Victoria and our 2 young kids. It felt good to be back, to see how the neighborhood continued to thrive, to be reminded that sometimes making a stand even over something as ridiculous as snow removal speed can make a real difference. My son, who was 6 at the time, insisted on seeing the famous tiny shovel in the community center. He stood in front of it, reading the plaque with Victoria's help, then looked up at me with wide eyes. "You really used this tiny shovel for 8 hours just to make someone mad?" he asked. "Well, yes," I admitted, "but it was about more than that. It was about not letting bullies tell you how to live your life." "But it's such a tiny shovel," he said, still amazed. "Your arms must have been so tired." Everyone within earshot laughed. He was right, it had been exhausting, physically and emotionally. But it had been worth it. As the party wound down and we prepared to head home, I took one last look at the community center, the neighborhood, the mountains in the background. This place had been the site of such conflict and stress, but also of growth, friendship, and positive change. The whole experience had shaped who I'd become and taught me lessons I'd carry for the rest of my life. Tom walked us to our car. "Thanks for coming back, Vince. It means a lot to everyone." "Wouldn't have missed it," I said. "This place will always be special to me, even though I don't live here anymore." "Well, you're always welcome. And hey, if our current HOA president ever goes crazy and we need someone to stage another tiny shovel rebellion, we know who to call." We both laughed. "Let's hope it never comes to that again," I said. "Once in a lifetime is enough for that particular adventure." Driving home, I reflected on how a simple dispute about snow removal had spiraled into something so much larger. It had exposed corruption and abuse, led to arrests and legal reforms, strengthened a community, and somehow made me a minor folk hero in certain HOA reform circles. But at its core, it had been about a very simple principle. People deserve to be treated with respect and fairness, especially in their own homes and communities. When those in power forget that principle, someone needs to remind them. Sometimes that reminder comes through official channels and proper procedures. And sometimes, apparently, it comes through the aggressive passive aggression of clearing snow with a child's shovel at a deliberately insulting pace. The tiny shovel method wouldn't work in every situation, obviously. But the underlying principle that creative resistance to unreasonable authority is both valid and sometimes necessary, that was universal. And if my ridiculous snow removal protest helped even a few people find the courage to stand up to their own HOA tyrants, then the sore arms and Linda's purple-faced fury had been worth it. Mountain View Estates continued to thrive long after I left. The reforms held. The community remained strong. And somewhere in the community center, a tiny red shovel hung on the wall, a permanent reminder that sometimes the smallest tools can dig you out of the biggest problems.